Okay, shoot. Anyway, so the recording for the YouTube might be a little messed up that way. But what was I saying there? So people, a lot of realtors, for instance, a lot of people will check their phones even before getting out of bed. Now, in and of itself, that sounds like it might be a very efficient thing to do. However, the way our brains work, well, let me put it this way. If you get a bad email, most times, most people, how are you going to feel? You're going to feel off. You're going to feel anxious or upset or whatever, right? So think about it this way. If that's the first thing you do in your day, you're kind of setting your day up based on that state, on that experience. So unconsciously, you're kind of programming yourself to look for more of the same, okay, without realizing it. So, a better ritual would be to have your phone, away from the bed, sit up and maybe do some deep breathing exercises, or do some yoga stretches, or a meditation, or something first, and then check your emails. Okay, so I want you to think about the rituals that you perform in your day. Another ritual would be staying on Facebook for too long, for instance. You have to have Facebook every morning or every evening. Another ritual would be your morning coffee, right? Or going to the gym at noon every day. So have a look at your rituals, but also I really want you to focus in on what we can consider the bad habits, the rituals that actually are limiting us rather than empowering us. And I'm going to take you through an exercise very much related to this. We're going to uncover a few of these habits, a few of the rituals that we can change and hopefully establish something new here. So just take a moment, write that down. Okay, so this is an exercise that I use with clients, and I do it in quite a few different ways. But I find it's on the one hand it's very simplistic, but on the other hand it really breaks down what we need to do, and we can I kind of see it like being like a Michelangelo sculpting a David. So you can kind of chip away at the marble, and eventually that masterpiece is revealed. So this is one way of doing that. So here's what I want you to do on your paper with your pen, or if you're using your iPad or whatever. I want you to think of a situation in your life where you're just not getting the results you want, where you're stuck, where you're maybe miserable or unhappy. Something that's just, in your opinion, just isn't working. So think of that situation. And what I want you to do, I want you to use as much detail as possible and write down the situation. So we're talking maybe a good paragraph or two, or maybe a page for some of you. It depends on the situation. But I want you to use as much, maybe it's going to be 3 pages. Maybe you have to pause the video and do it that way. Whatever needs to happen. Okay? But I want you to include every little piece of information that you can in there. So we're talking very descriptive words, adjectives, descriptive actions, emotions, feelings, anything that comes to mind. So just take a minute, describe it in as much detail as possible. The more detail, the more effective this exercise. And again, you can pause the video if you want a bunch of time. I'm just going to give you a minute or two here, and then I'm going to carry on with the exercise. But please feel free to pause it. And unless you're here live with me. If you're live, you can always come back to it later on. Because again, it'll be on Facebook, it'll be on YouTube if you're watching it on YouTube. But by the way, I always mention YouTube, but the YouTube video goes up, will go up the Friday following the Monday motivation. So the Friday of the week, the YouTube video goes up, the blog goes up, so you can read about it as well. And in the blog, the blog's going to be a little bit different than the video, so I might share some other details in there. So definitely worth checking out as well. And I see Whitney on here as well. I think, not even sure if I mentioned that. I might have just seen your name, or I might have said hi, but hi Whitney, I'm glad to have you here. Anybody else that's on here too, feel free to say hi. I found that sometimes on these Facebook Lives, the person's name will show up in green on my screen in the chat box. Sometimes it doesn't show up at all. So if you're on here, feel free to say hi. Feel free to ask a question. This isn't the coaching session, but the question might direct a little bit about what I talk about. Okay, so the next step. Now what I want you to do is, on a new piece of paper or whatever you can do, I want you to rewrite the exact same situation that you just wrote about. Okay? Only what I want you to do, let's put it this way. I want you to write it out in exquisite detail. I think that's a good word. Write it out in exquisite detail, exactly the way you want it to be. So exactly the way you want it to be. Whitney says hi. So take that exact same scenario. Maybe you have to do like a 180 with it. Maybe you just have to tweak a few things, whatever. Write it out exactly your ideal situation. Okay? So take a few minutes. Again, it might be a paragraph, it might be 2, it might be a page, it might be 3 pages. Whatever it needs to be. And again, if you're for anybody on here live with Whitney and myself, if you need more time, come back to it. You can come back to the recording. You'll see it at least on Facebook. Like I said, YouTube will be on Friday. If you're watching a video, you can just pause it. Take your time. I encourage you to make any exercise that I share on a Motivation Monday with a client. I really go into depth with it in the session, so it is different. But as best you can, take your time with these exercises. Really, really go deep as you can anyway. Usually I find that we have to be guided deeper. But go as deep as you can, see what you can come up with. You might surprise yourself with what's there. So again, exquisite detail, the way you want it to be. Just take another minute or two and write that out. Now what I want you to do, I want you to go back to the first one you wrote out. Okay, so the situation as it's not working. And I want you to go back and circle or highlight or underline all the words, all the actions, the feelings, the emotions that, how can I say it? That basically you could qualify as being negative. Excuse me if I sound a little bit off today, just because the remainder of that cold. So anything that would be disempowering, anything that would be negative or limiting. So for instance, you might say, or things that are, what's the word I'm looking for? Things that are too generalized as well. So a word like, what's an example? I always do this. Okay, so that would be a generalized statement. Is that actually true? It might not be. So that'd be one to circle. Or I get really angry. So angry would be the one to circle. Or let's say it's about somebody else. I don't know. He really pisses me off. So that'd be one to circle. But especially if you can figure out what your reaction to being pissed off is, to his actions are. So it's the pissed off part that we're looking for. So I want to bring it back to ourselves as much as we can and really find those, the actions and the emotions and the feelings, like I said, that aren't serving us, that are perpetuating the situation or the responses or what have you. Maybe Whitney, if that makes sense, just kind of chime in on that, if I've described that well enough to you guys. Now you can do the same thing in the positive version as well. So take the positive story and look for all the actions, the emotions, the feelings that are actually supportive of what you want. So for instance, you might say, well, I now find time for everything I want. That would be a very positive action. Or I'm now very loving in my relationship. Or I've developed very powerful discipline. Or every day I make the phone calls I need to make. Okay, so look for those positive. So on the negative version and on the positive version, look for the actions, the emotions, and the feelings that are. Thank you, Whitney. That are perpetuating either and supporting either scenario on a negative side or a positive side. I'll give you a minute to do that. Perfect. Thank you. So Whitney says it makes sense, so that's good. Oh, by the way, when you're doing this, I want you to try and stay as objective as possible. A lot of times when people start to explore their habits, their patterns, their emotional patterns, their behavioral patterns, it's easy to feel guilty about them. If we've been, disempowering ourselves or oppressive or even abusive to somebody else, it's really easy to get, pulled into guilt or shame or things like this. A little hint on, and maybe I'll explore this in a different video, but that guilt will keep us stuck. So as much as possible, be objective in your exploration today. And anything else we do as well. Again, I do apologize if I sound a little bit funny in my voice. I'm just feeling a little bit trying to be on video here. Now, what I want you to do, take the next part of the exercise, take everything you did from the negative scenario, the scenario that you don't want, all the actions, the emotions, the feelings, we'll call them non-productive actions, I guess you could say. Action including the feelings and the emotions. So take these non-productive actions or NPAs and write them all down in a separate place. Just that part, not the scenario, just the actions or the feelings or emotions. Immediately after that, so beside every single non-productive action, I want you to take the positive version, so from the other scenario, the positive action, the positive emotion or feeling, so a PA, productive action we could say. So immediately after the negative, write the positive. So one negative, one positive, one negative, one positive, how you've turned it around. Okay, so go ahead and write those down. Again, Whitney, if you don't mind, if you just let me know, even just a thumbs up, that makes sense. So I'm explaining what I want clearly here. So take the first scenario, any negatives, write them down. From the positive scenario, so every negative is followed by a positive. Every negative followed by a positive. So for instance, a negative might have been, I'm always late. So then the positive maybe was, I find ways to be on time. I find creative ways to be on time or something like that. Or I never make enough phone calls. So then the positive that follows is, I make more phone calls, more than enough phone calls every day. Or I'm making more phone calls every day, something like that. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for the feedback. That helps me know that we're on track here. Now, really, really important in this exercise that we take all those negatives and do turn them into the positive. Okay? And what I want you to do now, so after you've done that, if you're still working on it, great. But after you've done that, write a paragraph or two, whatever, about let's put it this way. If you take all the positives, okay, let's say we scratch out the negatives. Take all the positives, and if you were to implement them in your life, within context of that situation and elsewhere, if you were to implement the productive actions, the productive feelings and emotions, the positive ones, would you start to get the results you want? And don't just say yes, I want you to explore that. Would it change that scenario if you were to implement these things? If it doesn't, what else would you need? What would be missing? What paths of action are available to you? So we can write a little paragraph or two about that. If you were to Implement all the positives. Would you get the results that you're actually after? And if not, what else is needed? So take a moment and do that. Okay, now the next step, what I want you to do is have a look at every positive or productive action, feeling, and emotion. I want you to decide, let's say you came up with 6. I'm just going to pick a number here. Let's say you came up with about 6 of them. Decide which ones you'd like to implement first. I recommend a minimum, well, actually even a maximum probably, of 3. Why? 3 seems to be, in my work with people, 3 seems to be very achievable. It's not too much, not too little. I find that if it's too little, it might not create enough change. If it's too much, it might be overwhelming. Now, there are exceptions to the rule. Some people can only manage one thing. That's okay. Some people need to have 6. That's okay. But on average, I find 3 is really good. So I want you to decide which ones you would actually like to implement. Welcome, Linda. Again, we're just kind of going through habits. We're going through rituals and an exercise around, transforming negatives into positives. Negative actions, emotions, and feelings into, that are generated in a scenario that's not the way we want it, let's say, into ones that would be very positive, very powerful, very empowering, and help us produce the results that we do want in a scenario. So go through, decide which ones you want to implement. And the second part of that would be, how are you going to implement those? Let's say it's 3. How are you going to implement those 3 steps, whether it's an action, a feeling, or an emotion? Now, people will say, well, how do I implement a feeling or an emotion? Well, an easy way, I'll give you 2 examples. Number 1, you can just pretend. If there's a feeling or an emotion that you're after and you're not experiencing it, you kind of have an idea what it would look like. Be an actor or an actress. Pretend that you have that emotion now. That'd be one way to practice. Do that every day for about 5 minutes and see what happens. Okay. Another way to experience an emotion is think of the results, the positive scenario that you wrote out, and pretend for a minute that you're in that scenario. Step right into it. How would you feel? How would you react? Do that in as vivid detail as you can, like even close your eyes, whatever, visualize it, and put yourself in there and see how you feel then. Feel the feelings that you would experience if it was already real. One of the things I found with any goal, welcome, Harry. So we're just, and again, I don't always know, it doesn't always show up in green who's here, but anybody that's here live or, again, watching the video afterwards on Facebook or YouTube, we're just talking about habits, the power of habits, the power of ritual in our lives. And so I've just taken people through an exercise. You guys can go back and watch the beginning of the video if you like later on. Harry, we've done a little bit of work around this. But the power of habit, the power of ritual, and ways, a simple exercise, simple but very profound exercise to help transform a scenario, any scenario in our lives. We can use it anywhere. So again, going back to the exercise, think about how you would implement these things. Write it down. And again, the emotions, you can pretend or you can imagine yourself already there and feel those. Oh, that's what I was going to say. Feel those emotions anyway. Any goal that we have, this is what I was going to say. Really what we're after is a feeling. We're after a certain feeling. Take a minute and think about that. Anything you could ever want, why do you want it? You want it ultimately because you'll feel a certain way. Welcome, Shawn. Good to see you. So we're just actually talking about, I'm really happy to see you on here, actually. It's been a long time. I'd love to know how things are going. Just talking about the power of ritual in our lives, the power of habit. and I took the people through an exercise. So anybody who's just joining me, the replay will be up right as soon as we're done on Facebook here, so you can rewind it and watch the start, so you get the first part of the exercise, or on Fridays, the Friday of every week, it goes up on YouTube rather. So YouTube, it'll have the video, the blog will go up. The blog will have different details than what's in the video too, so it's always good to see. But again, when you're on here live, feel free to jump in to the conversation. You can say something, you can say hi, you can ask a question. I may not answer the question directly. That's what I do in the Facebook group, but I will. It may direct kind of where things go a little bit. So I'm really happy to have you guys here. So as I was saying about any goal that we have, we're trying to produce a certain feeling, and all you got to do is really just check in, really think about that for a minute, and you'll see that it's true. We're after a feeling. We're after an emotion. So one of the easiest ways to achieve anything, I'm talking anything, within the realm of the plausible. Okay, there's a difference between envisioning something really big for us, something we really desire, something we're called to even by life. There's a difference between that and what's called magical thinking. So an example would be, so Shawn was one of my Muay Thai students for many years, quite a long time ago. But there'd be a difference, so you'll get this example. Let's say you're in a wheelchair. It'd be very hard to take a Muay Thai fight or a boxing fight or a kickboxing fight, right? Maybe not impossible, but the boxing fight could happen, but you're not going to have a kickboxing fight, for instance, right? So magical thinking kind of says that I'm going to put this and this together, but there's actually no possible way for it to happen, right? Kind of another example, anyone who's watched The Secret, it's very easy to get caught up in magical thinking. So if I just sit on my couch and visualize this red Ferrari, it's going to show up in my driveway. Anybody ever try that? Doesn't work, right? So visualization is important, but it's important, the way I see it is, there is something at the quantum level, but for all intents and purposes, it's not as relevant to our everyday life. Let's put it that way. So visualization, the way I use it with clients and the way that I found to be very, very effective, is that we use visualization to create a certain state in ourselves, an emotional state. Okay, and that's kind of what that exercise does too. In the positive version of the scenario, you'll find that you can visualize it, you can step into it. Now, you create that emotional state, you feel empowered. You're going to take more action towards what you want, and the quality of that action goes up. Not only that, but when you visualize, you also kind of get clues and hints as to how you can make it happen. Okay, so there's a power to it. But again, going back to the exercise, if you can picture it now, you can experience the feeling now. You experience the feeling now, you'll be way more likely to do what you need to do to move towards it. So not only will you feel motivated, you'll feel inspired. Inspired, if we break down the word would be in spirit, right? So is very much an emotional thing that we're after as human beings. Is everybody with me on that? Does that make sense? So that's the exercise. You can just chime in, thumbs up, whatever. That's the exercise. If you got on here in the last several minutes, go back, watch the rest of the video. I really encourage you to take your time with the exercise. Like I explained to people earlier, when I work with somebody one-on-one, I can go into a lot more depth with them. I can guide them through, questions, through processes, through, any number of things. From child work to visualization to a guided, guided meditation, for instance, to any number of things. Look at values, beliefs, the unconscious elements that control our lives. But in these Motivation Mondays, what I want you to do is just immerse yourself as fully into it as you can. Okay, go through it. Take your time. Allow for intuitive answers. Thank you guys for the thumbs up. I appreciate the feedback. And even go back to it again. Reflect on it again. When I do an exercise like this with somebody, they might spend a good month developing that exercise, going deeper into it, so they have the results they want. So something else you can do, if you haven't already, and I know, obviously, Harry, I know you have, But if you haven't already, I'm not sure, Whitney, if you have or not, or anybody else that's on here. In the description, there's a link to book 1. I have 12 workbooks that I developed, that I wrote for working with clients. So it's 1 workbook per month. Book 1 is free to you. You don't have to be a client to have it. It's the one that's actually the most up to date out of all 12. And it's a very powerful workbook. So if you haven't done it, click on the link. And if you're watching YouTube, it'll be in the description as well. Click on the link, download the workbook, and take your time to work through every exercise. There's 4 areas. One is on working around beliefs, which are critical if we want to move forward. We all have limiting beliefs. We also have empowering beliefs. We need to understand them and be able to change them and adopt the ones that are going to work for us. Okay. So one's around belief. The second part is around vision and goals. So the bigger vision and the goals that reflect that vision. Breaking down those goals so they aren't magical thinking, but they are very tangible. Even if they really stretch us, they need to stretch us, otherwise it's not a goal. I talk about that too. The third part is around actions. So belief, goals are nothing. Vision is nothing without action. Action is pertinent. It's paramount to achieving what we want. Okay, as is the quality of that action. And so that brings us to the fourth part of the workbook. The fourth part is, you can say, the number one skill I found when working with people all over North America. Some very, very successful people, and I've helped them get there. They were even successful before working with me. The number one skill I found is their ability to be fully engaged. So fully present for what they're doing. You know, some people will be familiar with the term mindfulness. So the fourth part of the workbook is some exercises to help you develop the habit of mindfulness, of presence. So 4 parts. Go download the book. If you've already worked on it, with the new year, unless you did it recently, but being the new year, good time to do it again. You know, I have clients who have been with me like 5-6 years, and I'm having them do the same workbook again right now for this next year. Even one guy who he has a team under him, he actually shares and teaches a lot of what I do with him, with his team. And he's going back to this workbook. So the workbook is very powerful, very important. The second thing you can do, if you haven't yet, I know that Harry, Linda, and Whitney are all part of the Facebook group. I'm not sure if Shawn is or not, or if anybody else on here, or anybody watching YouTube or after the fact. But there's a link to join the Facebook group. Go apply to join to the group. Why? Because every Friday, and again, this will be very consistent now unless I'm away, every Friday there'll be a Q&A time where I actually work with you one-on-one as best as I can through the chat process. So you ask a question, you make a statement, whatever, and I'll address that as best I can with you. So it's the next best thing to have in a coaching session. Let's put it that way. It's as close as we can get. We also get to, you know, it's a smaller community, so there's a lot more interaction, or I'm aiming to have a lot more interaction that way. So if you haven't, download the book, join the Facebook group. If you've already done both, the next best thing you can do, if you want to, if it resonates with you, you can email me for a one-on-one session. I'd be happy to do that for you, no charge. You know, then you get, you know, some, you know, potentially a big breakthrough, but at the very least, some things you can do that are geared towards you as an individual, and we get to see about working together in the future if you want. Anyway, with that, you guys, we've gone actually a fair bit over time here, so I'm going to wrap things up. I really, really appreciate you guys being on here today. I hope you found value in the exercise, or if you weren't here for the full thing, I hope you do when you go back and watch it. I will see you next Monday, and again, on Friday, watch for the blog, watch for the posting on YouTube, and if you're in the group, come to the Q&A at 10:30. Sorry, what time is it? 9:30 PST, 9:30 a.m. So we'll see you guys next Monday for the next Motivation Monday. Cheers.